Hello there, and thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is John, and today we're going to be talking about a lot of different scenarios that might describe you if you are a Christian nationalist. And if you're not sure that you're a Christian nationalist, just continue watching, and if a lot of these things that I talk about resonate with you, or they seem to align with your worldview or your outlook on America and stuff like that, you might want to rethink your outlook on some of these things. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about those things in just a second, but just a quick reminder, if you are not subscribed to my channel, I would really appreciate that if you would subscribe, and then also just make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy the content here. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the video. So, number one, you might be a Christian nationalist if the American flag gives you warm and fuzzy feelings. Now, that's a pretty straightforward and simple one, so I don't think I need to talk about that a lot, but there it is. Number two, your church has at least one American flag on display. So you might be a Christian nationalist if your church has at least one American flag on display. That doesn't automatically make you a Christian nationalist, just if your church happens to have one. But that is an indicative sign that that is possible for you. I don't currently have a church home. We've been shopping around at different churches since we recently moved, and some of the churches we've visited do have American flags on their platform, and I'm not going to condemn any church for doing that, but that just seems to be a sign of Christian nationalism in those kinds of churches. The third one we have here is you might be a Christian nationalist if you think that the United States is a Christian nation. And a lot of us, just because of the propaganda that we've been taught in school, and because a lot of probably Christianity would make up the vast majority of, I'm not saying that most people in the United States are Christian, but if you were to divide the different religions into different categories and make a pie chart of which ones fall into some type of Christian denomination or religion, probably more than 50% of Americans would identify with some type of Christianity, whether it be Catholic, Protestant, Evangelical, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, something like that. So now I know a lot of you would say that some of those categories don't qualify as Christian, but they do identify somewhat to Christianity. So I'm just throwing them all together in one group. But it is actually far from the truth that America is a Christian nation. We never have been. I think it was John Adams that made a statement. I think it was at the Treaty of Tripoli, and I did a video on this about Christian nationalism a while back. But if America is a Christian nation, but he specifically said in there that basically the U.S. is not a Christian nation and never will be a nation made up of one specific religion. So let's go on to number 4. If you occasionally recite the Pledge of Allegiance, you might be a Christian nationalist. Now, I put occasionally because if you've ever recited the Pledge of Allegiance, I think that's just part of our culture and part of being an American. If you grew up in our school system or things like that, sometimes in some schools it's a requirement to do those things, and so maybe you didn't really have a choice, or you didn't know any better at some point. And there's been times when I've recited the Pledge of Allegiance, but I don't do that anymore. I haven't done that probably in at least the last 7 or 8 years. At least not unless I'm reciting it to give an example of what the Pledge of Allegiance says, like in these videos. But I don't recite it in a corporate sense of people standing up and saluting and pledging the flag and everything like that. So yeah, and why do I say that? Why do I say that that's a sign of you being a Christian nationalist? Well, because if you're a Christian, if you take the Bible seriously, there's warnings against idolatry, and Jesus even gave serious warnings against taking oaths and things like that. And that's what the pledge is. It's an oath of allegiance to your nation. So you're pledging allegiance to your government and to your nation when you pledge allegiance to the flag. It's not just saying that you love your country, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and I do love my country, but I don't pledge allegiance to the flag because that would be pledging allegiance to a government and to something that goes against God many times. And the next thing we have here, number 5, is that you might be a Christian nationalist if you occasionally sing the Pledge of Allegiance, or at least stand in reverence for it whenever it's sang. A lot of the churches that I went to in the past couple decades would sing the national anthem. That would be in their hymn books, they would have the national anthem. And we would sing that on patriotic holidays, like the 4th of July or Memorial Day, or sometimes on 9/11 or Veterans Day, things like that. And again, that might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but you don't understand that you are merging worship with God to this worship and sanctity and reverence for America that you hold in your head. And that is a dangerous thing when you combine those two things. Now, we're going to go on to number 6. If you assume that the words "under God" have always been in the Pledge of Allegiance, then you might be a Christian nationalist. And I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but I'll just quickly summarize it in saying that in the Pledge of Allegiance, we didn't have the words "under God" until the Cold War, because that's when America was at war with the godless communists, and they wanted to kind of get something for Americans to rally behind in support of this war. So they changed the national motto to "In God We Trust" instead of "E Pluribus Unum," and then they also incorporated the words "under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance. And a lot of people these days just assume that it has always been there, but it hasn't. All right, next one. Number 7, you might be a Christian nationalist if you are easily triggered when someone disrespects the American flag. You might not know this, but the American flag is just a piece of cloth with 3 different colors on it and some different patterns. That might surprise a lot of you, but there is actually nothing holy or anything holy or sacred about the American flag. It's just a piece of cloth. It has no divine creation or association. It has nothing to do with God. But just because a lot of Christians hold it very sacred in their minds and their hearts, they often get very, very offended and easily triggered. You'll see, a lot of times it used to be about 10 years ago, it would always be the conservatives and Republicans talking about how Democrats are snowflakes and how easily triggered they are. But just look at the news lately and see how easily triggered the Republicans have become and the conservatives. It's just insane. And they've become the snowflakes that they so often criticized the last decade or so. Now, the next one we have here, number 8, is that you might be a Christian nationalist if you see soldiers and police officers as God's righteous peacekeepers or as superior to ordinary citizens in any way. And I've seen this so often where Christians, or not just Christians, but conservatives and Christians alike, a lot of them, just basically bow in reverence to, not literally, but mentally, basically, they bow in reverence and basically say if you're not showing if you're not treating a soldier or a police officer with more respect than you show an ordinary citizen, then basically you're just a piece of dirt. I was almost going to say something else, but I better not because of my audience here. um, so anyway, so yeah, you're basically just no good. You're just a piece of garbage if you don't show that you ultimately respect and honor our patriots and our troops and our veterans and stuff like that. And if you show any slight disagreement with like going to war or like the wars that we fought in and stuff like that, then you're just like a liberal snowflake communist and you hate America. That's how it is framed from the conservative Republican warmongering perspective. Number 9, you might be a Christian nationalist if if you hold the American flag to the same level of sanctity and reverence as the Bible or God. So if you have like a high level of respect and sanctity and like you don't want to be like sacrilegious towards God or the Bible, or you don't want to be blasphemous against him or the Bible or anything like that. Now, that's normal. That's fine if you're a Christian and everything like that, and that's kind of expected. But if you hold that same level of respect and awe and sanctity towards the American flag, that's nothing else describes it besides idol worship. It's plain and simple. The American flag has become an idol. America has become an idol, and Trump has become an idol for many Christian nationalists and many Americans. And that leads me into my next one. You might be a Christian nationalist if you think Trump is good for America. And I must confess, in 2016, I did vote for Trump. It wasn't, he wasn't my first choice. I think back then I was going for Ted Cruz, or I probably would have chosen any other of the Republican candidates before Donald Trump, but just because he was the only one, and back then I thought if you were a Christian, you had to vote Republican because I was a Christian nationalist to a degree, I voted for Donald Trump, and I didn't vote for him in the last election, but if you think that Trump, even I can understand if you didn't know any better in 2016 like I did, and maybe you fell for the optics and things like this in this past election and you voted for him. And I've heard many people that voted for him in both elections, but now they are seeing through the veil. They're starting to see the man behind the curtain, and they're seeing Trump's true colors, and now they're saying how much they regret voting for Trump. So I can understand with you. I can resonate with you if that's the case with you. But if you still think to this day that Trump is good for America, are you sitting under a rock? In what world is Trump good for America? But if you think, if you are a Republican, MAGA supporter, Christian nationalist, then I think you really don't have the option other than thinking that Trump is good for America, because you have to remain part of that in-group. So anyway, we're going to continue on to number 11. You might be a Christian nationalist if you think separation of church and state only goes one way. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of people don't really understand what the separation of church and state is. Like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, they were big advocates of the separation of church and state. But a lot of Christians just think that means that basically the government is not to get involved in the Christian church's affairs. Like they're not to tell us when we can and cannot worship and which version of the Bible we can use and different things like that. But that's actually only one side of separation of church and state. Separation of church and state also means that the church doesn't get involved in government affairs. Now, I'm not saying that. Now, when I say that, a lot of people get confused and say, oh, are you saying Christians shouldn't run for office? No, I think Christians should run for office if you know what you're doing and if you really follow the Jesus way. But if you're a Christian nationalist, no, I don't think you should run for office, because you're trying to make America into a Christian nation. And then when that happens, you'll always hear Christian nationalists say, "Oh yeah, we believe Christians should be run for office, and they should help change America and make it more Christian." But the moment that it's the government, when it's the government saying, "This is what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do," then we have a problem with it. But I think it's getting to the point where a lot of Christians are not going to have a problem with it if they keep allowing the government and the basically the power-hungry corporate churches in America and the Christian Nationalists, if they allow them to continue doing what they're doing, then it might get to the point where we just we just kowtow to whatever the government says and whatever they promote as the national religion. Christians say that they're against a national religion or a state religion, but in all honesty and all practicality, basically, they do all want that to be the case. They want Christianity to be the national religion. Whatever version of Christianity is their favorite flavor, they want that to be the case. So if you think that separation of church only goes one way, that it doesn't, you can't have one without the other. If the government has to stay out of church affairs, then the church can't be involved in government affairs. Do you see what I'm saying? Are you smelling what I'm stepping in? So, yeah, the separation of church and state goes both ways. Now we're going to go into the next one. Number 12, if you think that the Bible, prayer, or the 10 Commandments should be taught in school, you might be a Christian nationalist. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with the last one I just talked about, the separation of church and state. But here's the thing. We were a nation founded on one of our things that we're most known for in our Constitution, the First Amendment, which protects freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, those things like that. And basically in our Constitution, it was made in such a way where the government could never make any laws regarding the establishment or the practices of religion and belief and things like that, belief in God. And if the government is promoting any religion, whether it be the right religion or the wrong religion, if they're promoting any religion, then in their school, then that is not that's not religious freedom. That's not freedom of religion. Freedom of religion means you can be whatever religion you choose to be. You can belong to any religion. It doesn't matter. The government is not supposed to intervene or make any laws regarding that stuff. So if you want the Bible and the 10 Commandments taught in school, then you should also be okay with Sharia law being taught in school. And for the record, I'm not in favor of either of those things being in school. I think that now, if you want to bring your own Bible to school, go nuts, break a leg. I don't have a problem with people praying in school or bringing their Bible to school or whatever. But if you're trying to make public schools in America into Christian schools, just go to a Christian school. There's plenty of private Christian schools you can go to. But when the government starts doing that, that is involving into very dangerous territory. And I heard a pastor say this once, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, that anytime there is a marriage between Christianity and the state or the government, it's never the church that comes out on top. It's never the church that wins. It's always the government. It's always powerful people in the government that corrupt the religion and that corrupt the state and things like that. So you shouldn't want that in school as something that is enforced by the school. The next thing we have is that number 13, you might be a Christian nationalist if you still stand in support of Israel even after all the atrocities and the genocide that they've been committing. it's pretty obvious that Israel is not in alignment with God, that they're not in alignment with the values of God or anything like that. And I'm not saying, this is not anything to say that I hate Jews or that I'm anti-Semitic or anything like that. And people always get labeled as anti-Semitic because they call out the atrocities that the Israeli government is doing, which is completely different than individual Jews. Just like you can't say that every German in World War II was a Nazi, or that every one of them was committing atrocities against the Jews. There were plenty of Germans that protected Jews and protected those people in minority that were hunted down by the Nazi government. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say. It's not it's not anti-Semitic to call out that behavior. And so if you're still in support of the nation of Israel, the government of Israel, after all the things that they've done, then you are a Christian nationalist. If you're a Christian, you're a Christian nationalist. Or maybe you're just a nationalist if you're not a Christian but you support them. All right, number 14. You might be a Christian nationalist if you don't think someone can be a Democrat and a Christian at the same time. And this is one thing that I saw a lot of times as a Christian in fundamentalist churches and stuff like that. I would see people, friends of mine on Facebook and things like that were in these churches, and they would always be talking about, and like, if you're a Democrat, how can you call yourself a Christian? Like, those things are two completely different things. Or you would hear in churches where basically it would be condemned for you to vote Democrat or vote anything besides Republican because they were anti-God and anti-Christ and things like that. And that's just utter nonsense. I mean, no other way to say it. Excuse me. Number 15, you might be a Christian nationalist if you see ethnic or religious diversity in America as a bad thing. If that threatens your freedom in America to see religious and ethnic diversity, then that shows basically that you are either a fascist or a white supremacist or just hateful of people of other religions. Or just that you don't believe in freedom of religion. If you think that it's a bad thing for America to have people in different religions. And then I'm going to continue on to the last one here, number 16. You might be a Christian nationalist if you think certain religions should be outlawed in America. So if you think that Islam should be outlawed in America, or Mormonism, or whatever, Hinduism, Buddhism, if you think that any of those things should be outlawed in America, then you are most likely a Christian nationalist. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for taking the time if you're still watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Make sure you like and subscribe, and God bless.